Hi everyone, you're very welcome to week 12 of the Higher Education Authority Education for Sustainable Development Spotlight Series. As I've mentioned in previous weeks, this series is going to run till the 21st of November, and we're delighted this week to have the IADT in this session sharing some of their ESD practice. Just some sort of notes for participation during the session. Please post any comments or questions you may have in the chat or the Q&A, and I'll be keeping an eye on those, and hopefully we'll be able to facilitate some of those at the end. And remember that the Higher Education Authority currently has an open call out for ESD case studies. And if you can't find the link, I'll post it in the chat. And also we have a call out for open education resources. So I'm going to hand over to Rónán now, who's going to start the ball rolling for the IADT. Thanks very much.
Thanks a million, Mark, and thanks a million, everyone, for this opportunity for us to talk about how we approach ESDs and, I suppose, sustainable and climate-related issues more generally. I'm going to talk as little as I possibly can. My name is Rónán Muirthile. I'm the head of faculty of Film, Art and Creative Technologies in IADT, and I'm also the climate champion, so it's a particular personal interest to me and the group that are here with me. We have a number of case studies and a number of people who talk about some of the work that they do and some of the things that they want to take on, and I think I'm going to try and set the scene a little bit in terms of the overall picture about how IADT is thinking about these things strategically as much as anything else. But I think it's much more interesting to start getting into the work of my colleagues and the work that they're doing on the ground, so to speak, and especially with students. I think that's when we talk about ESDs, I think the main thing, and it's a thing that one of the colleagues on the call with me here, Clyde Doyle, talked to me about very early on, that sort of stuck in my head, is how do we give students agency? How do we give them a sense that they can actually impact change? How they can really, you know, that in a world where climate is such a worry and such a source of anxiety, how do we really tackle these issues? So anyway, just with me today we have Heitor Laforga as well, who's a graduate of the MA Design for Change. He's going to talk about a project he worked on, which I think is a really interesting case study, which is the Good Guide to Creative Practice. Louise Glynn has been working tirelessly on a number of different cross-cutting modules that work in the Institute and impact a lot of students in terms of a lot of different areas around social engagement, but also climate and EDI as well. So that's a real particular thing that Louise brings to it, but also has developed resources for staff that they can tap into. I mentioned Clyde there earlier. He's been at the forefront of developing a new module or new modules that we're looking at rolling out across the Institute in climate action more specifically, but he's also been researching this space and has a really interesting project we're going to implement, shall I say, in the autumn around a teaching glade on the campus, which is exciting. And last but certainly not least, Dr. Cormac Dean, who's a lecturer in film and media and teaches a module in this area and is really championing the whole idea of a permeable campus. We've been meeting at the council and trying to, I don't know if any of you are familiar with South County Dublin, but the roads are being torn up for cycle lanes, which I'm a big fan of, but people aren't particularly a fan of the roadworks, of course. But certainly I think we have to look more differently about how we use spaces and how we think about space more generally. I think that's something that's really important. Now, that's the group. I'm just going to share my screen. I see a thumbs up there from Mark. Thanks, Mark. So just very quickly, I mean, I want to talk about, I suppose, to begin with, our Institute strategy. I think we're very, very much early in the journey around how we integrate ESDs and sustainability and climate more generally into the Institute and the fabric of what we do. We recently published a new strategy. It's been on the ground now, I suppose, for a year, but you know, there's some really strong language in the strategy. Now we have to live up to it around things like, you know, incorporating sustainable practice into our daily life, fundamental focus of the organization, embedding climate action in everything we do, developing curricula, ensuring sustainable development and as part of everyday life. And of course, Captain Planet is what people have started to jokingly call me. And when I was made climate champion, the idea was that this was is the running joke, I suppose, in the Institute. And it's something that if we can't laugh at it, or if we can't laugh at ourselves, and enjoy it while we're doing it, then rather than, and it feeds back. I mean, I'm not trying being flippant. I mean, it feeds back to the point I was talking about earlier about agency, that, you know, this has to be something that we communicate effectively as much as anything else. Just some of the targets. I mean, the big thing, obviously, I'm concerned with as Climate Champion is around meeting our requirements institutionally. But so the big things are reducing our greenhouse gases. The SEAI keep telling us this, and this is the big target. We need to hit the 2030 targets. We need a big deep retrofit if we're going to achieve a lot of the gas requirements. But we are working well on the energy usage. We're down 33.5% as of April in terms of our energy usage. So that we are starting to we're on track as we go. But as a lot of HEs know, the old building stock is a problem. Just touching on our people, we've now have our Climate Action Committee up and running for a year, Climate Champion. So these are, you know, we have our Planeteers. And now we've got to come up with a big thing is we're hiring a full-time climate officer now and sustainability officer who will hopefully be in place soon. And that'll really enable us to really start to embed things, because all of us are doing this as part of our roles, in addition to our roles. If you like, we're teaching, we're managing, we're doing all the other bits and pieces. So that's something we have to think about. But there has been a lot of training as well. So we're starting to ramp that up. How we change, we're changing how we work, talking about how we use paper, different certifications, public procurement. All these things are really, really important as what we do. And of course, the deep retrofit and phasing out park. These are all the kind of things that are coming top down in terms of the mandate that we need to be thinking about. And of course, then ESDs are something that I think a big gap in what we're doing is actually having a strategy around education and sustainability. And I think that's a big piece of work for the Climate Committee and the new Climate Officer, that we actually have a sustainability policy that is cognizant of education and how we build education into that, and integrating these key principles that, you know, that are coming from government, that are coming from our sense of, you know, this integration between social, economic and environmental issues. And one step in that road is we've done materiality surveys with our stakeholders, students and staff in the beginning. And you can see from just this one slide from it how important these issues are to our stakeholders. Like, we were trying to find out, like, you know, should we be focusing on one over another? But you can see from the slide, like, everything is very important pretty much to everyone. I mean, slight variations in terms of the emphasis, but people are really mobilized to do something about this. So it's really, really important to everyone. So that's me. I assume the slides will be shared afterwards, and there's a little link there to a video where Captain Planet saves Belfast, which is one of the funniest things I've ever seen in my life, and is totally on PC, so I wouldn't be necessarily recommending it, but it is funny. And I'll hand over now to Heitor Laforga, who'll talk about his project.
Brilliant. So my name is Heitor. I am an IADT graduate from the Masters in Design for Change, and I'm one of the creators of The Good Guide. That is what I'm gonna try to talk about today. The Good Guide is an initiative I developed while still a student at IADT as part of the Any Tutor program. I'm gonna give you a bit of about the project, walk you through the structure, and talk about how it reflects education for sustainable development, and specifically with creative disciplines. That is where I come from and where IADT sits. The Good Guide was conceived to integrate ethical, sustainable, and inclusive principles into the very core of creative education, meaning the students. Recognizing that IADT has a really diverse field and courses in terms of the offering, we aim to create a resource that would resonate across disciplines, aiming for more responsible and reflective praxis, kind of give students awareness and agency to deal with those topics. The initiative was a collaborative effort involving myself, 2 colleagues, and at the time also students, Claire Long and Eva Tobin, and supervised by Dr. Hilary Kenna, that unfortunately couldn't be here today. At IADT, my experience as a student within the context of sustainable development was always a concern and a fundamental part of the way we did work. while I was a student and after I was there as an employee as well. The good guide really builds up on that. The idea was with the original idea when we were kind of like brainstorming was to create a set of practical tools to help students reflect on the impact of their work and to take ownership for them, for their work and for the impact of it. It's all about empowering the students with simple, accessible ways to engage with what can often feel like an overwhelming challenge, something that like can be a bit daunting, and something that sometimes we just tend to feel that like we cannot do anything about it. The Good Guide is a comprehensive student-friendly handbook designed to introduce and reinforce ethical considerations in creative practice. When we were talking about the content, we came down to 3 pillars: looking at people, and looking at ethics, and EDI, looking at planets. That would be advocacy for sustainability to minimize environmental harm and work towards more sustainable futures, and the use of tech within the creative industry. That will be also relating back to sustainability and how tech can impact that aspect of our work, and also encourage like a more ethical and conscious use of technology. The guide kind of covers and offers like clear explanations on all those concepts, reflective prompts and pointers to additional resources. We did a whole work of benchmarking before actually creating anything, just to see what was there, what we could link back and refer. As I was saying, the creation of the Good Guide involved a desk research. We established like the foundational pillars. We compiled like loads of resources and benchmarking, as I mentioned. We did expert interviews. It was kind of like to get insight into people that are relevant and are experts in the fields that we're trying to talk about, and also talking to lecturers that they are their own experts into dealing with students. They are the people teaching our main audience for this project. We did student surveys. That was a very interesting aspect of the work. We saw like this huge engagement from first years and how they seemed to be at least the most conscious group around this topic of sustainability and ethics and the use of technology within this whole environment. And then we did a content analysis where we kind of synthesize and set up tone of voice and everything for the guide. Since the completion, the Good Guide has been integrated into IADT's first year induction packs. It was actually really well received. Had people coming up to me and be like, "Oh, you're the Good guy." So really positive outcome. We presented in various events, including the Initiator Showcase back in April last year. We made it accessible to a dedicated micro website inside PDL, that is Public Design Lab within IADT. And it was also granted additional funding from any tutor, where we got to develop toolkits targeting specific topics within these 3 main pillars, which are also completed and being tested in classroom at IADT. Looking at ESDs and how the Good Guide kind of aligns with it, there are a few topics that I think they're most relevant. That is the idea of like fostering critical thinking, and how can we make students care for those topics, and if they already care, how can we sort of like instigate them to engage with this without losing their interest or losing a passion for this. The second thing would be encouraging values based learning. That was a big part of my experience as a student at IADT. Our work was from the very beginning always based and guided by values. A third topic would be promoting inclusivity and empowering students. Rónán mentioned before, Clyde was my lecturer, and we had this conversation about like students having agency on their work and on the impact of their work. And I think that's really big into IADT, and it's one of the things that we really wanted to promote with the Good Guide. In conclusion, the Good Guide is a practical embodiment of what I believe ESDs are, and specifically within the creative industry and the creative education inside IADT. It equips the students with tools to navigate these difficult and complex topics, and kind of tends to encourage a proactive approach to the sustainability and inclusion within what a student can actually do. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Heitor. I'll just share my screen. So my name's Louise Glynn, and I'm a lecturer in creative computing in IADT. And I started working in sustainability as part of the N-Tutor project. And for those of you who don't know what the N-Tutor project is, you might not have heard of it, you may have, but just it was a funding from the HEA, the government, after COVID. So we had a lot of funding to focus on various themes. And I have a cross-faculty module called the Connect module, which already touched on some of the themes before the N-Tutor project came about. So then I decided to bring sustainability into this module. So I'll be talking a little bit about this module, which is called the Connect module. So embedding sustainability in this module. And this module is a cross-faculty module, which has 12 programs from the first year. And then I'll be also talking a little bit about the IADT intranet subsite that myself and my colleagues worked on as part of the N-Tutor project as well. So it's providing resources to help academic staff think about embedding sustainability in the curriculum. So first of all, just the IADT Connect module, as I mentioned, it's got 12 programs within the faculty. So there's about 400 students in the module. And we covered many of the themes from N-Tutor and all the themes from N-Tutor and other themes. And there are a lot of staff involved in the module. So for example, we would have the counsellor doing sessions on mental health, for example. But you can learn more about that. I'll share a link about the module generally. So it's a very, the aims and the learning outcomes of the module are quite broad and quite open. We really wanted to support the transition of students into level 8 and give them an overview of their own programme and be able to collaborate with other students from other programmes and enhance their critical and creative thinking and communication skills. And we're really focusing on the first year experience to help them get to know each other with students from other programs and the Institute generally. And all of the images that I'll be using in this presentation were created by students as part of this module. So you can see here on the left-hand side, a group of students made this image, and it represents some of the courses that they do, but also some of the themes like universal design from learning from the N-Tutor project. You can see this one actually aligns with digital transformation for teaching and learning. A lot of my students were online and maybe in bed watching the sessions because the module was run asynchronously. We recorded the sessions and put them online. Most people attended this year, though, live. So these are the learning outcomes. Again, they're quite open. So critically describe and discuss their own course among their peers, and compare and contrast the courses within the faculty, identifying similarities and differences to try and get this interdisciplinarity. And they had to create a digital artifact that represented the group's view of the faculty. Now, I expanded on this when the End Shooter project came about, and I said, well, they could create an artifact on any of the themes also of the End Shooter project, which you can find more about on the link on the opening slide. So how did I embed sustainability? So I actually did the course that Mark and his colleagues ran on open courses on sustainability. And one of the videos this year, the history of the Sustainable Development Goals by Professor Jeffrey Sachs, I found really good. And I shared that with the students live this year, because I didn't know the history of these, and I didn't even know the existence of them before the End Shooter project. So this was really interesting for me. I also shared with them an interactive web page on the SDGs, which the students that I employed in a focus group as part of the End Shooter project, they really liked this interactive web page, and they said that I should share this with the students. And it's explaining the Sustainable Development Goals, but it also shows the measuring progress as well. So this is created by the United Nations as well. I also came across this Metro map, which shows relationships between the topics and the SDGs. And it's really useful for students, but also for teachers, lecturers, to think about, to show different topics that could link up with the SDGs that they might think about using in their teaching. You can see here another digital artifact created by a group of students. They would have created all of the different images here separately. So I think this is one of the exemplary sustainability digital artifacts that was submitted this year. Some other things that I did was I shared an interactive map which shows each country's progress towards achieving the goals, again by the United Nations, and all of these links are in the presentation if you're interested in having a look at them. And then this short video as well on measuring the progress, because I think it's really important for the students to know, right, well, there are these SDGs, but what's been done about it? Then really recently, I came across this video by Hannah Ritchie, a TED Talk, and the title is, Are We the Last Generation? Or the first sustainable one? And I think it's brilliant. I'm really interested in, data science myself as well. And it was really positive talk. And I only came across that recently. So I'll certainly be sharing that with the students next year. But I did send it out to them. Even though the module's finished, I sent it out to them anyway, to say it's not all doom and gloom. So here's another example of a lovely digital artifact that was created by a group of students as part of the module. I really enjoy looking through these and giving them feedback. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is the work we did on the curriculum development framework. So we set up, myself and my colleagues, Clyde was part of the End Shooter staff champion team, and we created an intranet subsite with pages for each of the themes. And so here's our Education for Sustainability page, and we broke down the toolkit into tools and resources, curriculum documents, existing policies, in IADT, and training. So, for example, we have the tools and resources here. And this was really inspired by the work done previously by ATU. So I got, a lot of resources from the tool that they had created. So we kind of took a lot of those, but then added IADT resources like policy documents and so on. And we also did a survey of staff, and what they thought about embedding the themes into curriculum. And now, just to bear in mind, we only completed the intranet subsite recently, and we haven't really launched it. We'll be launching it in the next couple of weeks, because we've been just doing semesterization for the first time this year, and everyone's been extremely busy with that. So we're going to launch it at the Teaching and Learning Showcase and at faculty end of year meetings. But just there's just one of the questions on the survey is useful. So have you used the SDGs in your teaching? And this was inspired by the work done by UCC and MTU. So you can see here, I was asking them, have you used any of these themes? No poverty, zero hunger, for example, in your teaching? Did you know they were SDGs? So have you been using them? No, you were using them, but you didn't know they were SDGs. You were using them, but indirectly, it's not a learning outcome, or whether it was a learning outcome or a program learning outcome. So again, this was only sent out a couple of months ago, and really everyone was very busy. So I'm hoping when we have a link to it on the intranet subsite, so I'm hoping that more people will fill out the survey in the next few weeks, and we'll talk about maybe adding the SDGs perhaps to program documents. So these are the survey questions that we sent out. I'm not going to read them out because I know I've gone over time. So they'll be there in the presentation if you're interested in learning more. So thank you very much. I'm going to pass the baton over to Clyde.
Okay, great. Okay, thanks very much. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Mark and Anna and everybody who's here. I'm going to talk about a couple of, before I get going, I'm going to talk about, I suppose, the projects, 3 particular projects, and I suppose one of them is in the past a little bit, but I think it's worth kind of showing because it was a funded collaboration. It kind of speaks to a lot of different, I suppose, capacities within IADT, and then something that we're currently developing that's been in development now for a few years as well, and then something we're hoping to do shortly. And yeah, it's good to hear those positive I suppose sounds that Rónán's making head of faculty. So yeah, so I suppose just to start off, sorry with the rocky start there, but a couple of these projects would sit within a kind of a research lab we'd have at IADT, which Heitor mentioned as well. It's the public design lab. So it's a kind of a research lab that a few of us have established, which I invite you, the links will be in this presentation to go and have a look at the type of work it's doing. But essentially, it's a research lab which focuses on social design, or design which is focused on positive social and environmental impact primarily, as opposed to commercial. It kind of has come from largely from the MA in Design for Change, which again is a social design program. And Heitor, who's a graduate we have here, I think we have another couple of graduates, and a lot of these projects would have our kind of students or graduates would have been involved in these, as well as the inner. The first one to speak about here is the Fernhill Park experience, which was kind of a SFI funded project at IADT. Emma Leahy, who's the head of research at the time, was the PI on this, and what this was it was a collaboration between Dura Down with a focus on developing a kind of a device in the form, in this case, of a kind of an AR application, which students, particularly primary school age, would be able to learn about sustainability and energy use through a kind of a AR application. And it was a wonderful project in the end. It was a variety of different outputs. It was physical models created, but the key thing was that students were able to essentially inhabit the role of the park ranger, and they were given various different options in terms of how they would actually manage the park in terms of rewilding, energy usage, reforesting, and through this they were able to then get a sense of what would be the eventual outcome. So this was to encourage essentially again sense of agency and this idea of thinking about the future and long-term futures. And there was a nice part of this in terms of the impact where it was activated by a map of the park, which was distributed to a significant number of schools, I think up to 20 in the end. Stephanie Golden was the researcher on this, who managed a lot of it, and that feedback then from the students was fed into the app. Yeah, we hope we do have an opportunity, I think, for Discovery 2 on that, hopefully. A major component, I think, is worth mentioning that the idea of this, even though it was like the kind of digital technology was obviously core, like the actual ultimate aim would be that these young people would then go to this park and explore it. This idea, it would kind of draw them there. And I'm going to talk about the something that's been developed for a couple of years was the climate action module, which is something that's been in development for 3 or 4 years, and we hope to action it next year. So it will be a kind of a cross-faculty common module. Where this came from, as Louise mentioned, I was involved in the Tutor curriculum development framework, and I kind of came on board with a specific focus on like education for sustainability. My own background is in making, but my current research is in essentially developing nature connectedness and eco-literacy towards, I suppose, acting and behaving in the world in different ways. So what was key about this was that when we looked at this, and I've been working in this field with like undergraduate students and postgraduates for a while, but it was at a couple of workshops that I was facilitating and running, where when you began to dig beneath, I suppose, dig under a little bit, the kind of motivations for students to participate in this type of work, it basically, I suppose, we understood that the students really didn't, what they revealed was, in very candid conversations, if you managed to facilitate them, was that they didn't really think that there was much chance of affecting any change or having any positive. And when it was put to them, why are you doing these, like, design with nature workshops with myself, or why do you do sustainability projects? The feedback generally was that, well, it's important because it looks good and it's part of the curriculum. So that was quite a shocker. So then myself and a couple of others realized that really the kind of job of work here was to kind of shift that mindset away from this kind of existential fear of being able to do it and towards doing different things. This idea of, so the major components of this are like climate, this idea of literacy, different types of literacy, this idea of getting them to understand climate justice, and that actually speaks to their own role so much as, the burden of where it is, like not being on themselves and how they can do this. This point of agency, so how do you give them a sense that they can do something? And a really key kind of term that we use a lot is this concept of critical optimism. And I was actually on an Tutor masterclass, Dr. Emily Noonan, Noonan kind of talked about this concept from her own work of like developing this sense of critical optimism, where there's a sense of like, yeah, things will be different, but what can we do? What action can we take? So there was actually 3 proposed modules. I suppose the model would run over 3 years. So you'd move through a kind of a climate conversations module in first year, and then climate connections, and then eventually onto climate action. But we were able to plan the first and run the first 2 modules with first years. And again, the aims of these are this idea of like, understand it properly. And there was an element of running through like media literacy. That then kind of building upon that, there was a sense of kind of, I suppose, critical optimism was built through this like, emotional resilience, this idea of then connecting to nature. So there was lots of like place-based, bioregional and kind of, sensory processes which would help them reconnect. Communication skills. So it was key about these that they were kind of cross faculties. So there was a fantastic mix of like, psychologists and designers and business and enterprise and artists. So this idea that they would kind of collaboratively work together and kind of imagine these positive futures and then communicate them. So just briefly, I know I don't want to run over too much, but the first one was kind of the students did a lot of the same activity, but the idea was that they would create a prompt for conversation. And this will be pushed forward. And then the second module, which was a little bit more kind of, I suppose, focused on kind of real kind of action in a sense, and I suppose contains a lot of components from which we hope to develop this module. But this is led by Justina Doherty, who is another graduate of the MA Design for Change, who's expert in our current research, is in futures literacy in particular, and that brought the students through this kind of process of, media literacy, eco-literacy, and then futures literacy, and this idea of being able to, to basically create positive futures, you have to be able to imagine them. So what the students had done then, they were finally brought through this kind of a world building exercise, which is something that is well practiced on design for film, and which is like basically a collaborative process through which you kind of, imagine what this future might be. And again, with this critically optimistic framework, it creates different outcomes. And the feedback from those was really fantastic. It was very strong, and there was a real sense that the students did feel empowered and had developed a sense of agency through this. So particularly with the second module, this was trialed again in a different format this year, which is really successful again. So our challenge this year will be, how do we find a way of putting this into the broad kind of, so this is really in development at the moment. We've had one kind of a faculty meeting, and we plan to have another one next couple of weeks, just to, I suppose, identify how exactly we're going to integrate this into first year across the curriculum. But yeah, we're really excited about this. And then the last project I'm going to speak to is this future, which is something that is hopefully will be happening this year. And this is a kind of a teaching grade at IADT, and excuse my really poor visualization efforts here, but to give a sense of the scale and placing of it. And essentially what this is to, plant a pocket forest. And I'm using the word pocket, which would imply small. This isn't quite as small as your average pocket forest, because it's about, we'll be using the Miyawaki planting method, which, plants trees very densely, so they grow up very, very quickly. And they're kind of really, it's kind of developed for kind of urban, urban developments, and kind of the integration of nature back into urban spaces. But this would function as a teaching space ultimately, And what's exciting about this is that obviously it's completely, it's kind of, I think what's most exciting about this is that it's just the long-term nature of this, because actually the timeline itself, when it's mapped out, does speak over, at least 20, 25 years. So the final action that's in the plan won't happen until 2045. The aims of it obviously are, to test the model of it's a kind of a practical outdoor teaching space, the scale. So ultimately, and I'm not going into details here, but there's a particular, it'd be natural indigenous hedging, which ultimately would actually allow us to trial outdoor digital teaching spaces, so that you would be able to actually facilitate full hybrid classes from an outdoor space. The idea that obviously it's kind of it's a way for us to really kind of affect action very quickly, so it's a really visible thing for students, and there's a lot of excitement in the student body about it. This idea is that we can test different things, and kind of indigenous practices can be brought out through this, and partners. And I'm using this, some of these people, I've spoken to everybody here, but there's things that are established and are flexing. But the idea, obviously, from the Public Design Lab's point of view, it's an open, we would invite collaborations through that. But obviously Reforest Nation, who have very generously offered us, and they offered them this year, but we weren't in a position because we had to wait till the new building was finished. They have offered us these native saplings, which would include fruit varieties, but Hedgerows Ireland as well, who I'm speaking to, so hopefully will help us when, in maybe 15, 20 years to start laying hedges, but they're going to give us advice on what to plant. The idea would be next year, to be a Kenny fruit tree project in terms of grafting, and then just one of our partners that we've spoken to, but hopefully it'll be a real collaborative endeavor across the kind of campus, so the timeline for this would be planting this year. Autumn, hopefully we planted native trees. We would, look to, in spring, we'd be kind of grafting and planting of fruit trees, and the maintenance would begin. And then really, realistically, from spring 29 onwards is when the teaching day would actually be a kind of a functioning space that would, be enclosed enough to work in. And then what I'm particularly excited about and hope to be here for is the first laying of the hedge, the traditional hedges, white thorn, which also would incorporate fruit. So it would be like a resource as well for the local community to come and collect damsons, pears, apples, rose hips, etc., etc. So thank you very much. I hope I didn't go over too much there. I'll pass over to Cormac there.
So Cormac Dean is my name. I'm a lecturer in the Department of Humanities here in IADT, and I want to talk to you about, I've got two themes today. Okay, so the two themes you can see here at the bottom left, campus permeability and transscalar problems. Now, these are two separate things that I'm going to try and connect in what I'm talking to you about today. Campus permeability is about how penetrable our campus physically is for people who live in the area, and transscalar problems is more of a kind of theoretical issue that's to do with pedagogy. So let me go to the pedagogy first and just give it a little bit of context about what I teach and what I've been teaching over the last few years in the Department of Humanities. We have a module called Media and Climate Change. It's a final year module. We've just completed its 5th year this summer. It is for media students in new media specifically. So was slightly different to the cohorts of students that my friends and colleagues have been talking about so far in their presentations. These are media students who are imagining themselves moving into fields of journalism, radio, well, potentially anywhere, but not so much on the art side. So just to give a sketch of a few of the types of topics that we cover in this module. For example, science communication. So I won't go into detail on this, don't worry. But if you just look at the top right, you'll see science journalists. That's where our students might find themselves in their future careers. Or in green, they might also find themselves there. So how does science journalism work? How does climate science journalism work? Who knows what, and how does science get communicated? What kind of language, what kind of imagery, what kind of tone, what kind of outlets speak about certain types of science? And how does it fail? Because of course that is a crucial issue. Again, a whistle-stop tour here. So we also talk about the kind of culture wars surrounding climate and sustainability. As it relates to, say, class difference, as it relates to exploitation, to gender issues, to race issues, the global north versus the global south. We also look at things such as the agenda setting function of the media, which is a fairly old but really quite frankly outdated model of talking about news media. And part of the task that we try to tackle in our module is how to update agenda setting function theory models. So how does news become news? How does climate action, climate inaction become a newsworthy topic? Who's in charge of a news agenda? It's a very difficult field to map because of the nature of our of social media platforms and the modes that students have of consuming news about the world, if indeed they consume any news about the world. And also we look at the science of it and to kind of build literacy. So I'm sure many of you here are familiar with the Planetary Boundaries model of the Stockholm Resilience Centre, but also while looking at this, I'm interested in encouraging students to understand data visualization. How do you communicate through visualizations of data? Literacy, but how do you encourage action, or might you be inadvertently discouraging action by instilling fear? So the kind of emotional and affective attitudes that result from data visualizations are all part of what we're talking about. But underlying all of this, I think the key kind of theoretical underpinning of the whole module is to do with what's called transscalar problems. So a transscalar problem is a problem where there is a huge difference in scale between a given actor and the problem at hand. And climate change is clearly in that mode. So one of the major authors in this area, please don't try and read all of this, but you can see her name at the top there, Anne Pasek. She's a Department of English in a university in Canada. I'll just direct your attention to the highlighted statement at the bottom. All representations of climate are fundamentally representations of scale. So this is an important way of approaching the problems that students, well, indeed, that all human beings face when trying to comprehend the problems of sustainability and climate change and the planet in general, is that it's just so big and we are so small. also, it's not simply a question of kind of spatial scalar problems, but also time scales are different. Our timelines are not planetary. Our lifetimes are not those of geology or of the climate. And in fact, very interesting to see what Clyde's talking about there, the kind of long-term projection into the future. So of the glade, teaching glade, for example. So, and then I've highlighted another sentence here in green. Let me just read it. The problem of global warming requires inherently trans-scalar modes of engagement, encompassing times and spaces that exceed local frames of experience and meaning. So this is a key concept for the students in our Media and Climate Change module. How do you gain purchase on this massive issue that is notoriously difficult for anyone to even face, let alone do something about? So the assignment that comes with this module is that every student must go and find an event, an in-person event that they attend that has some sustainability or climate or biodiversity sort of aspect, and they must attend it and report on it in a given medium. And they kind of wearing their media student hats, they engage with it that way. And in particular, especially in the last couple of years, there has been quite a big set of changes in our local area, the Dún Laoghaire-Rathdown County Council area, where active travel program has really picked up a lot of speed. This is part of their online presence. So active travel, I think, is a kind of self-explanatory concept. Basically, how to get people out of their cars, how to get them moving, cycling, walking, and all that. And in the process of introducing active travel systems in the DLR area, the council held many meetings, many public meetings, many kind of local neighborhood groups, consultation sessions, and so on. And many of my students attended these and reported back on them. And it was a good example of how they could see something happening at a very local level that you could plug into an overall sort of meta view of what climate change is, what fossil fuel consumption is, and so on. So keeping the scalar thing in mind, let me just kind of move ahead to just to contextualize what our campus is and where it is. This is Dublin, and if you can see the piers of Dún Laoghaire sticking into the bay there. So I'm just going to move in a bit, and it takes a while till you actually find us, but you can see this is it's a city. It's full of people, it's full of homes, it's full of institutions, roads, buses, home, businesses, and so on. And you finally get into our little patch of ground here. So when you look at, and now I want to talk about the permeability issue, and I'll be very brief here, but if you look at our campus, on that east-west road at the top of this image here, that's how people move in and out of our campus, on that front facing onto the road. But our campus has three other sides. It also has, you can see with the white roofs on our campus, you can see there's a primary school there. And there's another institution, Blackrock Education Centre. So anyone who wants to get into our campus has to go round the front. And many of the people who are on our campus are coming from the blind side, so to speak. So how do we make our campus permeable? How do we create through routes for people, especially children and their parents coming in and out of school, which is a crucial thing? How do we make it possible for them to get in and out of the campus in a safe way, in a way that reduces congestion, in a way that reduces fossil fuel usage, and in a way that has a very long-term effect? Because once you make an opening such as this, and for a permeable neighborhood system, it creates long rippling effects throughout lifetimes of the way housing develops, the way shops develop, the way routes develop, the way childhood memories are formed. So we have spoken to the Active Travel Unit in Dún Laoghaire-Rathdown County Council. We've had very positive feedback on them about it. It kind of seems to be a question of when rather than if this can be initiated. So without going into too much detail, what I'm showing you here in this slide is just points in the perimeter of our campus that might be breached with a gate that will open into the local cul-de-sacs, because like so much suburban housing, everything is fundamentally one big long cul-de-sac. So how do you undo that cul-de-sacing of our lives in such a way that people can walk and cycle through? And if we do this, we can connect, looking at numbers 3 and 4, connect to an existing fairly permeable city block that is many kilometers long on 3 sides and would affect literally thousands of people over decades and decades. So this is hopefully a kind of an illustration of how the transcaler thing might work in our actions as in the Climate Action Committee and in our actions as teachers. Okay, I'll stop there. So thank you.
Thanks, Clyde. Thanks, Cormac, and thanks everyone. That was great, fantastic sort of overview, or a diverse range of different projects, some complimentary comments there in the chat about the presentations. I might pose a couple of questions, and if anyone else wants to pose questions in the chat, please do. If I go to Heitor first, because I just am very interested, because agency was mentioned a number of times from a student perspective. Like, what you produced as part of the Intuitive project and the design guide is fantastic, but like, from your perspective as a student, being given the sort of responsibility and trust, I suppose, to develop a resource that potentially and hopefully will be used by subsequent students, like, how did that make you feel as part of the sort of community within IADT?
That's kind of a funny one. I feel like one of the things that I had in mind when I joined the project, and we kind of established that we would kind of craft and tailor content to pass it on to people. The main idea was like, we are not reinventing the wheel. All the knowledge is there, but sometimes it's really guarded, and we just don't have how to get around or get through it without going through a lot of hassle. And the idea was like, let's remove the hassle. Let's make this information easy and accessible. So a lot of the work was reading and listening to people. I think like that's the two greatest skills that you can have as a researcher. And I believe that was also like how I would classify the work. It was a work of research and tailor information. So there was not much pressure on that sense, because I never felt that was kind of like creating something new. It was just like getting what was there and putting together in just one place.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, thanks, Heitor. No, it's a fantastic output, and the way it's structured, and I shared a copy of it in the chat there, can translate. Obviously, it's focused on the creative sector, but I think what you mentioned there, that the clear communication, simple steps, pragmatic, can be translated into any discipline. So no, fantastic, great piece of work. Clyde, lots of projects there, lots of really interesting stuff. I really like the climate conversations, connections, and actions. I think that's a module, or 3 sets of modules that we could roll out across higher education. I love the way they're sort of framed. And I'm thinking, as things evolve, I'm particularly thinking of, say, the new subject at Leave Insert, and potentially in a couple of years, we're going to have even more well-informed students. And that subject at Leave Insert is grounded in action. How do you think that will sort of evolve to move maybe earlier to action, because they've had those conversations at an earlier phase?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's really, I mean, it's great to see, and like, I think the kind of the core aim of the 3 modules, I suppose, there was a kind of an understanding, really, like in that kind of, I suppose, model of the different stages that that the students are at, and just, I suppose, like the idea really of the climate action one in 3rd year was that the students would have been pretty much embedded in their core program then, and they would have some, disciplinary expertise or knowledge that then they would be able to apply. So I suppose like the ideal scenario is that what you're getting is that, as a kind of a student. I think like that's what Cormac speaks to, this like later stage where like the students are able to identify their capacity to not just as individuals or people in society to affect change or have agency, but also to do it from a kind of disciplinary, kind of professional point of view as well. So like, how do I do this within all these really diverse areas? So I think in terms of the, different, those like, I suppose, different, those students coming in with that interest, the key thing I found was that you will get those students coming through, right? So like, what happened is the feedback that came back that was really exciting was that we had a sense of the students who hadn't selected the elective as a first option. So for me, that was the feedback I was really excited by, because they were like, it wasn't my first choice. I didn't want to do this, but it was like I was late applying, so I got stuck. And what they got, the feedback from them was actually like incredibly encouraging, because this was there to see. It's what you're trying to do with this is like reach the ones who really have. It's not they don't have any interest, but you'll have no buy-in at all, and it's to try and shift that mindset, because you're always going to get your kind of flag bearers and your people who are passionate and interested and understand it, but it's the kind of broader. So I think that's the kind of the really big challenge, I suppose, is to get that buy-in from everybody, and that's scaling up is key. No, it's going to be great to have those students coming in next year. I'm really excited by that. It's great to see.
Thanks, Clyde. And I think John just posted, and it was actually John that got ahead of me. I was going to link it to Cormac's transcalar approach, and what John mentions, I think transcalar really is the nub of the whole issue. There are two answers for this. Firstly, doing something is always better than doing nothing, and secondly, even some small slowdowns in climate change buys more time to build solutions, and we can see that from all the reports coming out. Every percentage of a degree counts. So I'm wondering, Cormac, like when you're addressing these issues with the students, and not that there's an ultimate result from it, but like it does give that sort of range and scope of thinking and that intergenerational sort of viewpoint as well, that we're so myopic in our current present state. And Clyde mentioned futures literacy as well in the mix, and just wondering how the students feel when they come through that process at the other end.
Yeah, it's I think what to put it negatively, what needs to be avoided is the tendency to responsibilize everybody. So to make it you are a problem because you don't know what to do with your cup when you've finished with it, and that you are a problem because you bought too many shirts this season or something. That it's an individual issue, and then everybody's isolated. Everybody feels that they have a personal carbon footprint, and that it's their fault. And then head in the sand, depression ensues, and nothing happens. So how do you break out of that? You break out of it. Well, I hope. I'm speculating that a way of breaking out of that is this transcalar issue, where you're trying to show a connectedness, that you are trying to show that there are small things that can be done, or inverted commas, minor things that can be done if they are well enough thought through, that have very, very long-term and very widespread implications. And so, I think that's what being educators, most of us, at least on this call, that's what you're doing all the time. You're trying to instill concept and confidence in people such that they then go ahead and take charge of things and genuinely become responsible for their own kind of purchase on the world, instead of feeling more like a kind of a failing citizen, which is a really kind of terrible kind of systemic problem that they all suffer from, the students. The students have no information deficit. They know how bad it is, but they do have a deficit when it comes to knowing how to respond in a way that actually is productive of hope.
Yeah, very good. Thanks, Cormac. And I'll just give the last word to you, Rónán. We're just at 2 now, but as you said yourself in the strategy and the aims, there's quite very strong language there. Like, how do you see that? And we've lovely examples of it today, but holistically translating into, as you said, everyday action across the curriculum, but also the operation of the university and the institute as well.
I think that's a transcalar problem as well. I'm more and more, it's about having the right plan and putting it in place and ensuring that it's, that things like our materiality survey, that we're proper consultation, we spend time working through it and figuring out what what we can do at a local, small and big level, and encouraging the schemes that come through, like Clyde's Pocket Forest, and trying to help enable those. And I think and a lot of it is about the right people, like in the right places, and getting them. So I think our job for next year to really put those plans in place while not stopping doing things. I mean, Tutor was a huge kind of injection of resources into the system. Like, how do we maintain that momentum? I think is really going to be important as well, because it showed. I thought it was an amazing project and really well executed in terms of the kind of impacts it had. So it's maintaining that kind of momentum as well. So it's putting the right plans in place, and because the big thing we wrestle with is how do we embed it into everything we do. I mean, I've talked a lot with Clyde in particular about, should it just be the module? I mean, I hate the idea of it being the climate module and then that's that boxed off. I think it needs to permeate everything we do in all our teaching. And I think Clyde has really come up with a clever way of this, the incremental learning that infuses then everything, and that infuses all the learning, so that everything we think about has that kind of. So it's all of that kind of piece. But sorry, I'll stop speaking now. We've gone over time.
No, but I
just want
think
to say thank you to everyone who's been
yeah.
involved in
So
this.
it was really interesting, and really thanks to everybody for taking the time to prepare and to present today. I just found it really interesting. And keep up the great work. If we can support you in any way, don't be afraid to reach out. So I'd like to thank everyone from IADT for today's session. Just to flag for people on the call, next week there's going to be a gap, so we'll send that out through email anyways. But in 2 weeks' time, we'll have Queen's University Belfast, and then the last session before the summer will be University College Dublin. So thanks again to everyone. I hope you enjoyed the session.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.
That's all.
Thank you. Bye.